My husband always handled our daughter's checkups alone. Every single time. He had an explanation for it, of course. He always did. He was a pediatric specialist, board certified, respected, the kind of doctor whose name appeared on hospital fundraising plaques in the lobby. "Why drag two cars when I'm already going that direction?" he'd say, kissing my temple before he buckled our daughter Hazel into the back seat. "I'll text you everything the doctor says." And he always did text. Detailed summaries. Growth percentile, iron levels, the usual developmental notes. I never had a reason to question it. I was 31 years old, working part-time as a graphic designer from home, while Hazel was in preschool 3 mornings a week. Our life looked, from the outside, like something people pinned to vision boards. A house with a yard and a quiet neighborhood outside of Philadelphia. Date nights on Fridays. A husband who coached youth soccer on Saturdays and remembered to buy my favorite tea without being asked. His name was Adrian. We'd been married 6 years. I want to be clear about something before I go any further. I was not a suspicious person. I was not the kind of wife who checked his phone or tracked his location. I trusted him the way you trust the floor beneath your feet, without thinking about it, because you've never had a reason to. What changed things wasn't a gut feeling. It wasn't a lipstick smear or a strange number in his phone. It was a Tuesday morning in February, and our daughter had a runny nose. Adrian had an early surgery scheduled. Hazel's regular checkup had been on the calendar for 2 weeks, and when I offered to just reschedule, he got quiet in a way I didn't recognize. Not angry, something tighter than that. "I'll move the surgery," he said. "Adrian, it's a checkup. I can just take her." I said I'll move it. He did move it. He rescheduled a surgical case to keep that appointment. At the time, I told myself it was just his particular brand of involvement. He was a doctor. He wanted to oversee things himself. It was a control thing, not a secrets thing. But later that morning, after he left, I found something on the kitchen counter that he'd forgotten. It was a folder. Plain manila, the kind you'd find in any office supply store. He must have pulled it from his work bag to look at something and left it there when Hazel called him from the other room to fix her cereal. I almost didn't open it. I stood there with my coffee for a full minute, telling myself it was probably surgical case notes, something I wouldn't understand. Something that wasn't mine to read. I opened it anyway. The first page was a printout I didn't recognize. At the top, in small font, it said something I had to read 3 times to understand. HLA Compatibility Panel. Donor Candidate Screening. Below that was Hazel's full name. Her date of birth. Her patient ID from Adrian's hospital network. I didn't know what HLA meant. I didn't know what donor candidate screening meant in this context. I photographed every page with my phone, closed the folder exactly as I'd found it, and put it back on the counter. Then I sat down on the kitchen floor because my legs wouldn't hold me. I called my sister first. She's a nurse. Not the same specialty, but she knew what HLA typing was. She knew what it meant when a child was screened as a donor candidate without a stated medical need of their own. "Where did you find this?" she asked. I told her. She was quiet for a long time. "Don't say anything to him yet," she said. "Don't act any different. I need to make some calls." The next 4 days were the strangest of my life. I smiled at breakfast. I asked about his day. I watched Hazel color at the kitchen table and thought about the folder and kept breathing, one breath at a time, because the alternative was to fall apart before I understood what I was dealing with. My sister called me back on Thursday. Through a colleague she trusted, she'd been able to piece together part of what the screening meant. Hazel had been evaluated, without my knowledge, without my consent, as a potential living kidney donor. The compatibility panel was specifically designed to match a recipient. "There's a recipient," my sister said. "Someone Adrian is trying to match her to." I threw up in the bathroom sink. When I came back out, I sat on the edge of the bathtub and I thought about every checkup I had never attended. Every time he'd said, "I'll handle it." Every time I'd believed the texts he sent afterward. I thought about the pediatrician. Dr. Finch, a mild-mannered man in his 60s who had been Hazel's doctor since she was born, and I wondered what he knew. Or whether he even knew at all. I needed to talk to Dr. Finch. Adrian had an overnight conference in Baltimore the following week. He'd mentioned it a month ago. One of those things that sits in the back of your mind as coming up. I waited for it like I had never waited for anything. The The morning after he left, I called the pediatric practice and asked for an appointment. The receptionist told me Dr. Finch was out that week, but Dr. Yun, his partner, had an opening. I almost said I'd wait for Dr. Finch, but something in me said no. Go now. I took Hazel in for what I told the receptionist was a routine concern. Dr. Yun was a woman in her mid-40s, calm, with reading glasses she kept perched on top of her head. She looked at Hazel's chart for a moment and then looked at me with an expression I had been too distracted to notice in ordinary circumstances. A careful expression. The kind that means someone is choosing their words. "Mrs. Calloway," she said, "are you here alone today?" "My husband is out of town," I said. She nodded slowly. "I need to ask you something, and I want you to know that whatever your answer is, nothing here changes, but I want to ask it directly." She paused. "Have you ever consented to genetic compatibility testing for Hazel related to organ donation?" I held very still. "No," I said. She closed the chart. She asked our nurse to take Hazel to the playroom down the hall. Then she closed the door and sat back down across from me, and she told me what she knew. Dr. Finch had been running tests, not standard pediatric tests, over the course of 18 months, across 6 appointments that I had never attended. Hazel had been screened for kidney function, tissue compatibility, and surgical risk tolerance. The results had been sent, not to a standard file in the practice's system, but to a private server account connected to a hospital in Zurich. A private hospital in Zurich that specialized in pediatric transplant surgery. The recipient, Dr. Yun told me, was a child named Felix, 8 years old. He was the son of Adrian's college roommate, a man named Garrett Holst, who is now one of the wealthiest private equity investors on the East Coast. Felix had been in renal failure for 3 years. Both of Garrett's biological children had been tested for compatibility and ruled out. His wife was not a match. His own tissue was not suitable. They had been on the international transplant list for 2 years with no viable match. Hazel was a near-perfect match. I don't have words for what it feels like to sit in a pediatrician's office and hear that your 4-year-old daughter has been quietly auditioned, without your knowledge, to give up a kidney for someone else's child. I remember staring at the pamphlet rack on the wall. There was one about flu vaccines and one about sleep schedules for toddlers. I stared at those pamphlets because I needed something ordinary to anchor me to the room. "Dr. Finch," I said eventually. "Does he know I didn't consent?" Dr. Yun was very careful. "I can tell you that when I found these records 2 weeks ago, I immediately contacted our practice's legal counsel. I have not spoken to Dr. Finch directly about it because I did not want to alert anyone before I had guidance on how to proceed. But I will tell you this. He was told you were aware, that you'd agreed verbally and the paperwork was forthcoming. Adrian told Dr. Finch that I knew. Adrian told Dr. Finch the paperwork was forthcoming. I thought about 6 appointments over 18 months. 6 times he buckled Hazel into the back seat and driven her to that office and let a doctor run tests on her body to find out if she could be cut open and have a piece of her removed. And he had done it by telling the doctor that I knew. He used my name. He used my consent without asking me for it. Dr. Yun told me she had already been in contact with the hospital's legal team. She had a colleague who worked in pediatric ethics advocacy. She gave me 2 names, a family attorney who specialized in medical consent cases and a patient advocate at Children's Hospital of Philadelphia who dealt with exactly this kind of situation. "I want to be honest with you about something," she said, and she reached across the desk and put her hand over mine briefly. "This is going to get complicated. These are powerful people. But what was done here was not legal, and you have documentation." I had photographs of the folder. Dr. Yun had 18 months of records. I called the attorney that afternoon from the parking lot of a Target, sitting in my car with Hazel asleep in her car seat behind me. Her name was Patricia Shen. She answered on the second ring, and by the time I described the situation, she had already stopped me twice to ask clarifying questions that told me she understood exactly what I was describing. "Do not confront your husband," she said. "Do not let him know what you found. Do you have somewhere safe you can take your daughter for the next week or 2 while we move on this?" My sister had a guest room. I told Adrian I was taking Hazel to visit her aunt. He didn't question it. He was still in Baltimore. He texted me a photo of his hotel breakfast and a row of small emojis, and I stared at those emojis for a long time before I put my phone face down on the kitchen counter. The following 10 days moved both very fast and very slowly. Patricia filed for an emergency protective order on the grounds that Hazel had been subjected to unauthorized medical procedures and was at ongoing risk. She simultaneously filed a complaint with the Pennsylvania Medical Board against Dr. Finch, with the full documentation from Dr. Yon's records. She also contacted the Attorney General's office because Garrett Holst was involved, because there was a Zurich hospital, because money had moved, and Patricia found, through subpoenaed financial records, that Garrett had already paid Adrian a retainer of $240,000. $240,000 sitting in an account I didn't know existed, as payment for arranging access to our daughter's kidney. Adrian came home from Baltimore to a house that was locked. His key still worked. He let himself in and found the rooms quiet and called my name and didn't get an answer. And then he called my cell phone and I sent it to voicemail, and then Patricia called his attorney, and that was how he found out. I was not there. I did not want to watch his face when he understood. I've been asked since then whether I think he ever loved me, whether he married me on purpose, knowing what he would one day want to do. I've thought about it more than I can describe. What I've landed on is this. I don't think the answer is simple. I think he did love me, in whatever way he was capable of. I also think that when Garrett's son got sick, and when Adrian calculated the odds, he chose Garrett. He chose the money and the friendship and whatever debt he felt he owed, and he decided to solve the problem using the most convenient resource he had access to. Our daughter. I think the worst part isn't the betrayal, as enormous as that was. The worst part is that he was patient. He didn't panic and do something reckless. He spent 18 months quietly and methodically building a case, running tests, filing results, collecting data. He treated Hazel like a clinical variable he was solving for. And he went home every night and helped her with her puzzle and read her bedtime stories and never showed a single crack. That kind of cold takes a long time to fully comprehend. The custody hearing was in May. Adrian's attorney argued that the testing had caused no physical harm to Hazel, which was technically true. Patricia argued that unauthorized medical testing of a child without parental consent constituted a fundamental violation of parental rights and child welfare protections, and that the financial arrangement with Garrett Holst constituted child exploitation under Pennsylvania law. The judge agreed. Adrian was granted supervised visitation only, pending the outcome of the criminal proceedings. Garrett Holst was named as a co-defendant. His attorneys were from a firm in Manhattan, and they were very expensive and very good. It didn't matter. Dr. Finch surrendered his medical license before the board could revoke it. He gave a statement saying he had believed fully that I had consented, that he had been deceived by Adrian, and he cooperated entirely with investigators. I believe him. I think he was a well-meaning man who trusted a colleague and trusted a piece of paper that said consent was coming and never asked me directly because Adrian had trained him not to need to. I think about that too. How much of what Adrian built depended on people simply not asking the direct question. It is October now. Hazel is 5. She started kindergarten 3 weeks ago and she carries a backpack shaped like a llama, and she is learning to read, and she has no idea how much of the last year revolved around protecting her. She knows her dad isn't around the way he used to be. She asked me once why, and I said that sometimes grown-ups have to figure some things out, and that she was loved, and that nothing that was happening was because of anything she did. She accepted that with the straightforward trust that 5-year-olds have, and then she asked me if we could have waffles for dinner, and I said yes, and we did. My sister sits across from me at that same kitchen table sometimes and says she doesn't know how I held it together through those 10 days when I knew and he didn't know that I knew. I've thought about the answer to that. I think what held me together was something very simple. I had a job to do. I could feel things later. First, I had to do the job. There is one more thing I want to say. For anyone reading this who is somewhere in the middle of a situation they don't yet fully understand, who has found something, or noticed something, or felt something shift that they can't name yet, don't confront him alone. Don't try to solve it alone. Find your Patricia Shen first. Find your Dr. Yon. The people who will ask the right questions and not look away from the answers. The documentation matters more than the confrontation. I was not a suspicious person. I was not someone who looked for problems. But I was someone who opened a folder when something told me to, and then I made the calls I needed to make, and I did not stop making them until my daughter was safe. That's the whole story. That's all of it. Hazel is upstairs right now. I can hear her playing. She's narrating some complicated game involving her stuffed animals and a cardboard box, her voice rising and falling with the story she's telling herself. I'm going to go listen to it now. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since everything happened. Not in the dramatic way, just quietly, in the mornings before Hazel wakes up, with my coffee going cold on the counter. The way things unraveled the way they did wasn't random. It followed a logic. Every choice Adrian made pulled the next consequence toward him like gravity. He chose to protect a secret instead of trusting me with it. That choice required another choice, keeping me away from those appointments. That choice required another, lying to Dr. Finch, forging my consent and everything but signature. Each deception had to be maintained by a larger one, and somewhere in that chain, he stopped seeing Hazel as his daughter and started seeing her as a solution. That shift, I believe, is where he lost everything. Not in the courtroom. Not when Patricia filed the first motion. Long before that, in some quiet calculation he made when Garrett's son got sick, and he decided the math worked out in his favor. The thing about that kind of thinking is that it has no floor. Once you decide a person can be a means to an end, you don't stop at one decision. You just keep making the next one. What I've been sitting with more recently is the question of my own part in it. Not guilt. I want to be clear about that. I didn't do anything wrong. But I've thought honestly about the ways I made it easier for him. I trusted without verifying. I told myself his need to control the appointments was just a quirk, a doctor's particularity, something benign. I accepted the text summaries because they were detailed and I was busy and it was simpler. None of that makes me responsible for what he did. But it reminds me that trust without attention isn't really trust. It's just comfort. And comfort can be manufactured by someone patient enough. What pulled me through wasn't courage exactly. I don't think I'm an especially brave person. What I had was clarity about one thing. My job was to protect Hazel, and I hadn't been doing it fully because I hadn't known I needed to. The moment I knew, the job became obvious. You don't feel brave when you're doing the obvious thing. You just do it. The resilience piece. And I do think about this, came from not trying to process the enormity of it all at once. I couldn't afford to sit with the full weight of what Adrian had done while I still needed to act, so I didn't. I took the next step and then the next. Patricia. Dr. Yon. My sister's guest room. The custody filing. One thing. Then the next thing. That's not a strategy you read in a book. It's just what happens when you don't have the option of falling apart. And then there's the intelligence piece. The part where I think about what I'd tell anyone in a similar situation. The documentation mattered more than any confrontation ever could have. I photographed that folder. Dr. Yon kept those records. Patricia knew how to turn paper into protection. The people who wanted to dismiss what happened, and there were some in the early stages who suggested it might be a misunderstanding, couldn't dismiss 18 months of lab results and a $250,000 wire transfer. Facts don't require anyone to believe them. They just require someone to find them and hold on. Hazel is 5 now. She doesn't carry any of this. That was always the goal, and for now, it's holding.